Now we want to look at what happens when we try to do address translation in parallel with cache access. We start out with a virtual page number and a page offset. That's our virtual address format. Then the translation look-aside buffer translates the virtual page number to a physical page number, and the page offset is simply is still the same after the address translation. And then for cache access purposes, this physical address is divided into tag, index, and block offset fields. So don't confuse the block offset with the page offset. In this example, take a look at it. What's the page size? That's right, it's 4K bytes because the page offset is 12 bits wide, and that corresponds to 4 kilobytes. How much physical memory is there? Well, that's determined by the length of a physical address, which is 25 bits long, and therefore there must be 2 to the 25 bytes of physical memory in this example. If we want the cache to be indexed before address translation completes, we need to have the index field be entirely contained within the page offset. Let me show you why. Because what comes down from the TLB is the physical page frame number. If that overlaps the index, we don't know what the index is until address translation completes. And if we want to start cache lookup, we have to know the index before we even engage in address translation. So, if we can do it this way, so that the page offset entirely contains the index and block offset field, then we can use the index field to access into the cache while we're translating the address through the TLB. And in that case, cache hit time reduces from 2 cycles to 1. But there are some constraints. Suppose our cache is direct mapped. Then the index field is just the line number. So that means that the line number concatenated with the block offset must fit inside the page offset. So not the index field, but the line number concatenated with the block offset. Now, if I give you the line number and the block offset, that completely determines where in the cache this field resides. So if we have this situation where the index field contains the line number because the cache is direct mapped, then what's the largest the cache can be? And the answer to that is 1 page. Because the index, well, in this case, the line number and the block offset need to fit inside the page offset. You see, if it's a set associative cache, then the index field can refer to more than one set. So the cache can refer to, the index field can refer to more than one line in a set. And so the cache can be larger than a page. But in this situation, where it's direct mapped, and we want to perform address translation in parallel with cache lookup, the cache can be no larger than a single page. So if we want to increase the size of the cache, what can we do? Well, think back to the last lecture. We can make the cache set associative because that increases the tag width and decreases the width of the index. Remember in that example we started out with a direct mapped cache with a 7-bit line field, and then we went to a set associative cache, and those 7 bits were compressed into a 6-bit index field. And so as the cache gets more associative, then the width of the index field diminishes, and when it becomes fully associative, the index field disappears altogether. So how are we going to use this information to allow cache access in parallel, or to allow cache access in parallel with address translation? Well, for new machines, we can select the page size so that the page size is greater than the cache size divided by the associativity. But if the page size is fixed, we need to select associativity so that associativity is greater than the cache size divided by the page size. Now that can be a pretty severe constraint. If we look back at two example architectures that I had lying around, both of them are more than 30 years old. We look in the Motorola 88110, the page size was 4 kilobytes. And the iCache and Dcache are both 8 kilobyte two-way set associative. The fact that they're two-way set associative means that there's 4 kilobytes per way, and so if the page size is 4 kilobytes, we can do the cache access in parallel with address translation. On the digital equipment VAC series, really influential architecture of the late 1970s, the page size was only 512 bytes. For a 16 kilobyte cache then, we needed the associativity to be greater than 16 kilobytes over 512 bytes, and that means 32-way set associative. Now it's been a long time, if ever, since I've seen a 32-way set associative architecture on a real machine. I think about 2005 there was a Sun machine that had like a level 2 cache, 16-way set associative, but 32-way is really severe and just not feasible because it increases first the cost of the hardware and secondly the access time unacceptably. So we want to finish off with 3 questions about cache indexing and tagging. What's the main disadvantage of physically indexed and tagged? What's the organization we've been discussing in that last diagram over here? And what's the main disadvantage of virtually indexed and tagged? Well, the main disadvantage, typo there, of physically indexed and tagged is that access time is too long because you need to complete the address translation before you can start to access the cache. And the organization we've just been discussing in the last diagram is virtually indexed but physically tagged because we saw that the index gave us a virtual address, but we had to translate to a physical address by the time that we accessed the cache. And what's the main disadvantage of virtually indexed and tagged? Well, that's that the cache can't be shared by multiple threads unless you have a way of moving a block within the cache, which is called renaming hardware. When you get a new process's virtual address in place, some of the cache lines need to move to a different place in the cache.